Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome, as always, to the UAS lectures. Before I introduce the speaker this evening, just the usual housekeeping rules, please. Make sure that your mobile phones are turned to silent or off for the duration of the lecture. And also, people at home can make sure that they are on mute. Not expecting any problems, any emergencies or fires or anything, but just for your information, the fire exits two at the bottom of the hall here and two at the top. The rendezvous point is the car park in front of the building. And the signing in sheet going around, if you wouldn't mind, please signing your name so make sure that it's accounted for. Right, well, it's my pleasure then this evening to introduce our speaker to you, Dr. Cormac McSparran. Cormac started studying archaeology here at Queen's, also modern history, and graduated with his BA in 1989. Continued with a master's in 2008 and followed up by his PhD in 2018. Since 2002, he worked in what was then the Centre for Archaeological Fieldwork and directed a number of excavations in Northern Ireland and has published widely. His particular interests include funerary archaeology, Chalcolithic and Early Bronze Age Ireland and Britain, archaeological theory, migration patterns, social structure, and the application of C14 dating to archaeological problems, medieval ceramics, and lots more, I think. So he's currently a research fellow here at Queen's, and so we're delighted to have him talking to us this evening about the excavations at Tirnony Dolmen near Maghera. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'll just let everyone get seated, and then I'll dim the lights a little bit. I think, yes. So our excavations at Tirnony Dolmen, or Tirnony Portal Tomb, depending on which terminology you like to use, took place in 2011, or 2010 actually, in 2011, and at present we have completed our analyses and our radiocarbon dates, our various different types of laboratory analyses, and we have submitted our final report to the Historic Environment Division actually a wee while ago, and we've passed through now the peer review process, so been accepted for publication in the proceedings of the Royal Irish Academy, and we should be coming out with the final paper on the excavation later this year. Tirnony Dolmen is part of a class of monuments which is typically described or called, at least in Irish archaeology, portal tombs. You may be aware that there has been some discussion about the appropriateness of the term dolmen, which some people have suggested is a wider and looser classification than portal tombs, but I continue to use the term portal tomb simply because from those where we have good evidence from excavations, certainly in Ireland anyway, they do seem to have had burial as a primary part of their function. I'm not saying that they're solely tombs. I think these are multifunctional structures provided with a number of different ritual and social functions, but at least part of their functionality is as a repository for human remains, and not just one set of human remains, but many human remains. And as such, I think it's still appropriate to use the term portal tomb with qualification. Portal tombs began to be constructed, well, I've said on this slide, circa 3800 BC. In truth, there is at least a certain amount of evidence that could push that 100 years, if not even 200 years earlier, but certainly they are in use by 3800 BC and probably a little earlier than that. The portal tomb is so called because of its form. And you can probably see here, and this is actually Tirnony Portal Tomb, you can probably see the aspect that's formed by the large capstone, which I'm sort of encircling with the mouse here, and the two portal stones either side, which form a doorway, porta in Latin. And it's from that Latin term, porta, the doorway, that we give them the term portal tomb. The entrance and the emphasis on the front and the entrance and the side stones and the capstone framing that entrance are what's has been traditionally thought of as giving them their form and leading to their definition. The Tirnony portal tomb itself has the usual set, or well, a slightly modified version possibly of the usual set of components of the standard portal tomb. There is, as I've just mentioned, the large capstone. Tirnony's large capstone is not a huge large capstone, it's quite a modest capstone. When it was removed, after, and I'll explain a little bit about why it was removed in a minute or two, but when it was removed with a crane prior to the excavation, the HED crane, or as it was then Northern Ireland Environment Agency crane, was able to measure the weight of the capstone, and it came out at about 6 tons. But that's actually relatively small by portal tomb standards, and there are capstones which are 4 or 5 or possibly even 6 times that weight on some capstones which have been surveyed and recorded, but not necessarily excavated. I certainly wouldn't want to excavate under one of those without having it taken off first. The other aspect of the portal tomb, as I've just mentioned, is of course the 2 portal stones which frame the doorway. But then, of course, at the rear of the portal tomb, there is the burial chamber. And in portal tombs, unlike, say, passage tombs or even court tombs, there is only one single, really, burial chamber. There's not either an extended passage or, as you would get with a passage tomb, or a number of small burial chambers like you may get in a court tomb. It's a single chamber which you enter from the doorway passing into the chamber. In the example at Tirnony, the capstone really only sits over the portal stones and just about touches what are called the side stones of the chamber, the east and west side stones here and here. It only just really rests upon them. And it's generally considered that it was likely that Tirnony dolmen had a secondary capstone. And this is something that has been found in a number of different portal tombs, a secondary capstone, usually smaller and flatter, and not with the same emphasis maybe on display and front, if you like, of the big capstone, but another secondary capstone to cover the chamber. It's also quite likely, and there is a certain amount of debate about this, but it's also quite likely that Tirnony was largely encompassed in a cairn. Now, some of you may have read Cummings and Richard's Monuments in the Making, which was published a couple of years ago, which poo-poos the idea that portal tombs had cairns. They seem to believe that the portal tomb, that part of the impressiveness, part of the aspect, part of the appearance of the portal tomb comes from the fact that it's these sort of finger-like stones, pointing up into the sky with this impressive capstone placed upon them. And while that's a very nice idea, there does seem from some excavations to be certainly a certain amount of evidence for cairns around portal tombs. And in Tirnony itself, in the Ordnance Survey memoirs, there is reference to a large amount of stone being taken from the tomb to be used in the creation of the nearby roads within living memory of the Ordnance Survey memoir in the 1830s. So that suggests very much that sometime in the late 18th or early 19th century, most of the cairn, well, all of the cairn stones, more or less, were presumably taken away to use in different construction of different roads in the immediate vicinity. So we seem to have a historical record that implies some sort of significant cairn at Tirnony. Cairns are also important in how we conceive of portal tombs being constructed, because it's generally thought by most people who have studied them that the likely way to drag the capstone into place is to actually drag it up on the cairn. Cummings and Richards suggest a different possibility, they believe the capstone may be raised through a series of blocks and levers and you know, lever wedge, lever wedge, lever wedge until you've raised a large capstone up in situ, and it's certainly theoretically possible to do that. But I don't think they've established it, given that we have evidence for cairns, certainly at some portal tombs. Oh, sorry, just before I go on, I have here a 3D model of Tirnony, which I'm going to try and see if I can display this. I'm going to click on it and see if it works. Oh, I have to go out of this, sorry. 1 second. Technology leaving me behind here. How do you get rid of that little pointer? Is it just? Ah, thank you. That's it. That's it. Great. Oh. That's it. There we are. Thank you. See. Is it up there? That's it. Oh, right. Oh, it's not. It's not actually turn. Oh, right. So it's a bit like this. What's that? You know, Douglas Adams. You know, people so primitive they still thought digital watches were cool. Well, I'm so untechnologically sophisticated that I still think 3D models are cool. This is a 3D model of Tirnony portal tomb as it now is, and if you actually try and get a bird's eye view, that's possible. You can see the shape of the chamber and the capstone only partially covering it. And one of the things you might notice, and if you look to what's just to the northeast, if you like, of the hand that's on the screen, there is quite a flat recumbent chamber stone, which is much smaller than the others. And it has been speculated upon that this actually could be a secondary entrance into the tomb. And it's very difficult to say that with any certainty, because of course we don't really have the evidence. There could just simply have been some other dry stone work built upon that. But there are 1 or 2 portal tombs which are known, which have a secondary entrance at the side, and of course there are also some court tombs which also have a secondary entrance at the side. So I'll just move on now back to the PowerPoint again. Thank you. There you go. Great. So the reasons for the excavation at Tirnony. We don't, of course, typically get the opportunity to dig Neolithic burial monuments very often. They're generally protected structures, and of course, it's important for archaeologists, really, especially since these are a resource which is depleted every time you excavate them, to only really dig at monuments like this whenever we have either no alternative or have an extremely good reason or extremely good research question for carrying out a limited investigation of the monument. In this case, the reason why we had really very little alternative to excavate was because during the very, very bad winter of 2010, you remember there were a couple of very, very bad winters, 2010, 2011. I remember in May, I think 2010, the snow was still in the Glenshane Pass. It was an extremely cold winter. And during that winter, this portal stone here, which seems to have been undermined by a root from this ash tree and possibly even cracked slightly by roots from this ash tree, and presumably water ingress made its way into the matrix of the stone. With the expansion and contraction of the very severe frost, I think there were days where it was -12 or 13, -14 in that part of the country. That portal stone cracked, and the tomb collapsed in itself. And on the right, you see the sort of sorry picture of Tirnony portal tomb after this stone had cracked and caused the capstone to collapse into the center of the tomb. It was realized that, you know, to leave the tomb like that, of course, would have only increased its rate of decline and decay. So a decision was made by the then Northern Ireland Environment Agency, now HED, to carry out a restoration of the tomb. And it was realized that tomb restoration was going to be quite invasive and possibly probably destructive of whatever archaeological strata there may be inside the tomb. So they asked us at the Centre for Archaeological Fieldwork in Queen's if we would carry out an investigation of the tomb on their behalf before the DOE, as it was then, Northern Ireland Environment Agency, workmen restored the monument. And they actually, I have to say, they actually did an excellent job of restoring the monument. If you visit the monument now, you really can't tell, unless you look very closely, you really can't tell that it's been repaired and restored. When I say you can see it if you look closely, it's not as if it's an invisible mound, and that's quite important actually, because you would want, especially if records were lost or forgotten, not that that's very likely, but short of a devastating war or something like that. But if records were lost, you could still with someone who had any experience of construction or architecture or archaeology could easily see that the monument had been repaired, but it's done in a way that's very unobtrusive to the casual visitor, and I think that's probably the perfect compromise. So our methodology for digging, we were going to dig the exterior of the monument where it was likely there was going to be some heavy equipment put in place. And we also wanted to dig at the interior of the monument too, although not all of the interior of the monument. We tried to leave, and we did manage to leave a section at the back of the monument undisturbed. But we knew that during the process of removing the portal stones and the capstone for repair and then replacing them, it was very likely that the middle portion and the forward portion of the tomb, the deposits there were going to get very disturbed. So we excavated the bulk of the interior of the tomb, and we excavated the exterior of the tomb to the mostly to the east and south sides. To the west, there was the Tirnony Road, which is in all probability the road which the stone material from the tomb was taken to construct. And we obviously weren't going to close the road and remove the tarmac surface. So that side of the exterior of the monument was left uninvestigated. The exterior we simply dug in the conventional stratigraphic manner. But the interior of the monument, in addition to the normal excavation by stratification and recording of finds in 3D, we also split the interior of the tomb up into 25 centimeters squared. So all artifacts were recorded both by their exact 3D coordinate, but also by the 25 centimeter grid square that they came from. And we also took soil samples from each 25 centimeter grid square for each strata as we dug down through the interior of the monument. So we literally brought hundreds of kilograms of soil samples back to the archaeology lab at Queen's, where they were processed, and some of them, of course, were processed by the late John Davidson, who we just found out today has died. Very sad for his family and for anyone who has been involved in Queen's archaeology at all, really, over the past 40 or 50 years almost. But so we essentially brought the site back home with us, is really what we did. And we do believe that we have extracted just about every piece of information which it was possible to extract using current techniques anyway from the site itself. Thankfully, we have still got this little time capsule at the back, so that if there were some questions which some people thought in the future it might be possible to ask in a new or different or enhanced way, there is still the possibility to return to the site and certainly look for further scientific samples. On the exterior of the tomb, we found evidence for 19th century architecture, not very surprising. The ubiquitous rigs, or lazy beds as they're sometimes called, were run quite close up to the tomb. We found 5 or 6 of these potato rigs. And we also found this yet another roadway. This roadway stops just shy of the tomb, and you can also see a 1960s or 70s water main, which is well, no, that's not a water main. Some sort of a culvert or drain, covered drain, passed quite close to the monument. It seemed to have been constructed in the 1970s. But this roadway, this metal surface, actually quite a good metal surface. It was made of 2 layers, and the lower layer contained some 18th century pottery. So we think that likely dates the construction of that road. And you can see actually in the next photograph that there are a couple of grooves. And they're more apparent in some photos where there's a little more shadow. A couple of grooves which almost certainly indicate cartwheels. And you can also see that the 19th century potato rigs have cut through the end of this roadway. It's just another photograph of the roadway showing the 2 layers. The excavation of the exterior of the tomb generally was a little bit disappointing. We didn't find anything that was definitely cairn material. We did find some stones which could have been cairn material, which we weren't really in a position to remove because of their proximity to the rear of the tomb, and also this gravel and feature and concrete pipe. But we didn't find anything that was definitely cairn material, which was a little bit disappointing. In the interior of the tomb, we found several different tomb deposits. There was beneath the sod and the topsoil, there was an upper tomb deposit. There was a lower tomb deposit beneath that, all sort of brown loamy fills filled with Neolithic pottery and small fragments of flint, and then cut into the natural subsoil underneath the tomb. Cut into the natural subsoil, one underneath the tomb and another couple possibly not underneath the tomb, but there were a number of pits. You can see in this diagram that there was this large pit which was actually slightly undermined. The west portal stone and actually at one stage made excavation a little bit dangerous until we got some props put in place. And there were a number of other pits as well. A pit here towards the rear of the tomb, and two depressions towards the front of the tomb, which are actually the depressions for the east portal stone and the little flanker stone, which sat outside it, and which almost made a little bit of a prehensile court, if you like, almost. In addition, there was a stony layer, 415, which, and it's not really, you can't really see it very well on this on this plan. You can actually see it slightly better on the next photograph. Actually, partly covered this pit as well. So the layer 415 was removed to expose this large pit, which seems to have been in place, but certainly before the portal stones were put into position. On this photograph here, you can actually see the west portal stone. You can see the pit, and you can see some of those stones which were sitting on top of the pit being pressed down by the weight of the front portal stone. And that's really one of the things that we really have managed to find from this excavation, leaving aside the artifacts and the scientific samples, is that we were able to identify the sequence of construction. This large pit, which you see in the photograph in front of you, seems to have been the first, or one of the first things which was put in place on site. This contained a few pieces of broken Neolithic pottery. Phosphate analysis did not indicate that this pit had probably contained any human remains, however, unlike, say, some court tombs where pits have been found underneath them, which have contained human remains. But in this case, there was no evidence for, there were no bones found, and there was no evidence from phosphate analysis that this pit had ever contained any human or animal remains. And before the tomb was constructed, there seems to have been a stone-packed surface placed on top of this pit, a stone floor, if you like. And we think that it's possible, or maybe even probable, that that was the deliberate sequence of construction of the tomb. The pit dug first, then a deliberate floor placed on top of it, and then the stones of the tomb constructed upon that floor. Pits like this have been noticed in quite a number of portal tomb excavations, not just in Ireland, also in Western Britain, and particularly in Wales. And Cummings and Richards, in their making monuments, or monuments in the making book, have pointed this out. In fact, it was part of the rationale behind their concept that portal stones, not portal stones, capstones were actually excavated, if you like, from natural living rock and then raised up in situ, because they were able to detect in a number of areas the pits from which either the rocks had been cut or alternatively the rocks had been lifted. In our case, we have the pit, but the pit is clearly much too small to have been the place where the rock was donated from. And also, it's the pit isn't cut into bedrock; it's cut into subsoil. Bedrock isn't very far away, it has to be said, but it's clearly not a bedrock surface, and it is too small for the capstone. And this is just another photograph kind of showing the same thing. You can see very nicely there the sort of the west portal stone, the fill of this pit, and the flooring layer sandwiched between the two. You can also see why the tomb collapsed. You can see this lovely great ash plant root running between these two stones here, and it was one of those ash plant roots which seems to have made its way into the east side stone and caused it to collapse. One of the things that became apparent to us as well during this excavation, which isn't really an archaeological thought as such, not in terms of the physical construction of the tomb or anything like that, but it's more a sort of conceptual idea of how all of our tombs in the landscape, certainly they're below the tree line, must have been kept free of trees for the past 4,000 or 5,000 or 6,000 years, depending on the type of tomb. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any. Our trees would simply have covered them, would have destroyed them within a few centuries. So, you know, Tirnony Dolmen has been free of trees for 6,000 years, nearly 5,900 years or something like that. And it was only when a very innocent ash plant, ash tree, a few meters away, sent a single little a few little tendrils out, which grew into substantial roots, that the monument got into trouble. So someone, or many people, over thousands of years have kept this tree, or kept this monument free of trees. And I think that's an interesting and kind of profound thought. This is just a little cross-section drawing to just illustrate what I've just said about the various different tomb deposits, the upper tomb deposit, the lower tomb deposit, and then the fill of the pits. This is not the big pit. This is the second little pit which I showed you, which we think may have, if one large pit was a ritual act put in place before the rest of the tomb was constructed, then we can see that the second little pit may otherwise similarly be some sort of unusual act of ritual, or maybe it's just even a marker, a flagpole or something like that, that was placed to mark the position of the other pre-tomb pit. So just really to go over that a little bit again, there's one thing actually I want to mention. I want to go back to photographs. There's something I forgot to mention. You might notice there's a little bit of a slightly darker area, or a reddened area here, and sitting on top of the stone floor layer. This is the place where the east portal stone sat, and when the east portal stone had been collapsed and taken away for repair and the area cleaned up, it became apparent that the earth that it had been set onto had been reddened by fire. Unfortunately, there was practically no charcoal, which suggests that whatever caused that fire reddening underwent almost complete combustion, just turning into carbon dioxide and water vapor, because we sampled the entirety of that little soil layer, but nevertheless it was fire reddened. And it does suggest that someone set some sort of fire or conflagration of some nature before that stone was put into place. Now, as many of you will be aware, There are burnt areas have been noted under a number of Neolithic monuments. Court tombs have had fires in their courtyard areas. Various different types of Neolithic cairn, like Lyle's Hill, for instance, and at Knock Ivy, have burnt layers with occupation material and well, not really, but occupation possibly, or material derived possibly from occupation, strewn within the burnt layers. Some people suggest them as feasting before the tomb's construction. We don't have anything as extensive as that at Tirnony, but nevertheless, we do have this small little deposit under the one portal stone, that the one proper tombstone, if you like, apart from the capstone that we actually removed, had this fire-reddened area under it. And that's interesting, and it's suggestive. We can't say it's more than suggestive because we didn't remove any of the other stones apart from that for repair, but it is very suggestive that there was some sort of possible act of carrying out some sort of a dedicatory ritual that involved fire before some, at least, of these stones were put in place. So I'm just going to scoot forward again. We're going the right way or going the wrong way? We're going the wrong way. Still going the wrong way. So if we look now at this potential sequence of tomb construction, we have a pre-tomb pit, or possibly a pit and a post hole. We have a deposit of stones that's laid down over that pit and post hole, forming a sort of a platform. And on that platform, at least we can see that the portal stones have been set, possibly for one of the portal stones involving some sort of deliberately placed fire, which itself may indicate an element of ritual. And then we can see orthostats being placed immediately after that fire ritual. What is interesting, however, is that we do potentially see a difference between the exact time that these two front portal stones were put in place and the rest of the stones of the chamber of the tomb. There is a layer which accumulated in between the emplacement of the side chamber stones and the two portal stones at the front of the tomb. It was a layer which wasn't particularly thick. It was only a couple of centimeters thick, but it was something which would not have accrued overnight. There was certainly a period of time between the erection of the rear of the tomb and the erection of the front of the tomb. So if you want to think in terms of a developed sequence for Tirnony, you would have the construction or the digging of the pit, which we presume is some sort of ritual act with its associated post hole, the deposit of stones over the top of the pit, potentially the construction of the rear of the tomb, and then a little bit of a pause. It might have been a pause for the winter, possibly. It could have been maybe a pause of a couple of years. It may have been a pause for an extended period of time. And then the construction of the front of the tomb, the building of the cairn, we presume, with temporary struts in the interior of the tomb to keep its integrity, and then the placing of the capstone, possibly using the cairn as a ramp. When the capstone is in place, of course, that gives a certain amount of consistency to the rest of the structure and integrity to the rest of the structure. It presses the rest of the structure down, helping keeping it in place. And at that stage, a very brave person can enter the tomb and remove the remaining internal supports. Oh, another little photograph of that burnt area where the east portal stone was put in place. We got quite a lot of artifacts from inside the tomb. We got Neolithic pottery. It was Western Neolithic pottery, carinated vessels, almost all of it. There were one or two other pieces of pottery, which were a little bit later. We have two pieces of what seemed to be grooved ware, very small fragments, which we think are grooved ware. And we also got one very interesting vessel, which almost looks like a miniature vessel, or what they used to call pygmy vessel, which would be early Bronze Age. And we do have some indications, which I'll discuss in a little while, of continuing activity at the tomb. But with the exception of those 3 pieces of pottery, all the rest of the ceramics, well over 150 pieces of pottery, were what used to be called Western Neolithic pottery, or what we now tend to describe as the carinated bowl tradition. And you can see in this photograph a nice rim shard of carinated bowl, and someone's been held by Ruth Logue, actually, in Ruth Logue's hand, I think. And we also got some really nice Neolithic flint work. In addition to a few pieces of debitage and things like that, we got 3 absolutely beautiful flint tools. There's a rather simple plano-convex knife, which was found just here, up against this west side stone here, or east side stone here. We got a second, and I'll show you it in the next slide, slug knife or plano-convex knife, which is found just beside this side stone. And then we got this. It's some people say, well, Grant Sloan says it's a scraper, but it would also have functioned very well as a discoidal knife. It's got the sharpness of a knife, but it has the angle of attack of the blade of a scraper, and it was found just here up against the west side stone as well. This is the other really nice slug knife, sort of photographed a little bit better. And you can see this is an absolutely excellent museum quality artifact, really. The pressure flaking that's been taken off that is of absolutely first-rate quality. And this is a very typical of the sort of good quality early Neolithic flint work. And these are photographs of the discoidal knife stroke scraper, and the other slightly less well formed, but still nevertheless very nice plano-convex knife or slug knife. The fascinating thing about the pottery from Tirnony, and this is something that's been noticed in other sites as well, is that the pottery at Tirnony was fragmentary. Well, that's always the way in archaeological excavations. Pottery is always fragmentary. But not only were all the pots smashed, as you would expect, but we didn't find very much of any individual pot. We have something like, by the time when we took all the different pieces, we have something like 17 or 18 shards from 17 or 18 single individual vessels. But we don't have any more than maybe at most 15 or 20% of any individual vessel. So it wasn't as if someone took 17 individual pots and they were like placed in the tomb, and then gradually over time, as people come in and out of the tomb and brought bodies into the tomb or did other rituals, they all got trodden and smashed and broken up. And then we have to find them and put them back together. And there's a few bits missing, but we kind of get the bulk of the pots sort of glued back into one piece sort of thing. It was nothing like that at all. These vessels must have been brought into the tomb in an already fragmented condition. And this is something which has been observed now in a number of different excavations of early Neolithic period. It's been observed in other portal tomb excavations, and it's also been observed to a large extent in court tomb excavations. And it does seem as if, in some respects, we are seeing vessels that are brought to the tombs when they're already broken. These are not simply vessels that are brought whole and then by some process, post-depositional process, that we lose the evidence. These are vessels which have already been fragmentary when they're brought there. In fact, not only are they fragmentary, but only a bit of a pot is being brought, or a bit of multiple different pots are being brought and deposited in the tomb. And that's something which I'm going to return to in a few minutes' time when I talk about some other aspects of what we found. We also found this, and this is not Neolithic, but we found it quite far down in the strata, which is a little bit embarrassing. But I mean, there was tremendous root action through the strata. But this is an early medieval blue glass bead. I mean, it's just about possible, I suppose, that it could slip into the Iron Age, but almost certainly this is 7th, 8th, 9th century. The even more embarrassing thing is that, for archaeology as a whole, but not necessarily for Tirnony, is this is not the only time that a blue glass bead just like this has been found in the portal tomb. At Auchnaskey, in County Louth, the excavations there in the 1940s, there was a blue glass bead almost exactly found in this, exactly the same as this found there in a very similar location, seemingly pressed down into the tomb deposits in the interior of the portal tomb. And there's also a court tomb as well, which is another similar blue glass bead. And we were really struggling for interpretations for this, and we haven't put this in our final paper, but we're going to write something about it maybe separately. But one of the visitors to Tirnony put me on to the work. Of course, some of you would know him, Edward Lloyd or Ludd, the first director of the Ashmolean Museum and also a founder of the Royal Society in early 18th century Britain. And he was a famous sort of Anglo-Welsh antiquarian, and he travelled widely, and as both as an antiquarian as also as a sort of an early anthropologist. He travelled widely in the west of Scotland, and he noticed that in the Scottish Islands that they had a tradition of using what he described as an antrocus, because it's which is I think the Latin word for a snail's shell. But he was using antrocus to mean these lovely. He was describing these lovely little blue glass beads like this as antrochi, and was suggesting that in the Western Isles of Scotland, people use these antrochi as a form of folk magic, where they would look at the moon and cure eye diseases by looking at the moon through these blue glass beads. Well, it's quite interesting that there is a holy well, which is a tradition as an eye cure well within the immediate Tirnony vicinity. And it's considering that this is obviously a much later practice than the one that was carried out in the primary use of the tomb, but nevertheless, someone at some stage presumably believed that the appropriate place to deposit your eye cure after your successful cure, possibly until you retrieved it and used it the next time, was in some sort of tomb that you associated with the forces of the fairies or whatever else you assumed was going on. So it might be that there could be some sort of late medieval or early post-medieval folk magic or folk medicine explanation for the now 3 cases of very, very similar blue glass beads being deposited in much older Neolithic tombs and cairns. We recorded, as I mentioned earlier, everything by 3D grids. Well, we recorded the position of the artifacts in 3D, and we recorded the soil samples by 25 centimeter grid square. It's also quite useful to use that grid square to look at the grid squaring system to look at the patterning of artifacts. And one of the things that we did notice is that if you look at this illustration here, in each grid square we have numbers which correspond to identified pots, numbers and in each square, and we have artifacts. So this is a wee bit difficult to understand because there's no key here, and this is my nomenclature. But essentially, we find the flint artifacts against the side chamber walls, and we find them in areas where there are very few finds of potsherds. The potsherds are concentrated in the central area here, and they're concentrated away from the sides of the tomb. But at the sides of the tomb is where we are finding flint artifacts, stone artifacts generally. This is just to reinforce that. These are the number of potsherds which are being found and possibly identified in the tomb interior. You can see 34 in this square, 7 here, 9 there, 1, 5, 5, 1, and 9. Well, the 3 1 squares there are the ones which contain the 3 flint artifacts, which we've noted already. This is also the results of our phosphate analysis from the tomb interior. I mentioned that we took phosphate sample from the pit under the tomb, and then a very low rate of phosphate, no higher than that for the surrounding fields. We had two controls in the surrounding fields. But in the main tomb layers, the ones which were above, which were above the pit and which were separated by the pit from the pit by the stone flooring material. In those two layers, we had a much higher level of phosphate, and much higher than the controls outside, and they were concentrated in these three squares in the center of the center of the tomb, and they're very consistent with what you would expect from fleshed human remains having been placed into a tomb and decayed in situ. Defleshed human remains would provide a different phosphate signature, and really the only way that you would be very unlikely that you would get phosphate levels like this with just small mammals coming into the tomb. And there has been experimental archaeology carried out actually in recent years, looking at different types of interring and different types of things which can skew phosphate analysis. And this phosphate analysis was done by the University of Bradford. They're very confident that this, on balance of probability, is very likely to show interring of unburnt human remains inside this tomb. Insofar as you can say that, you can't say that with certainty, but it does seem extremely likely. Our radiocarbon chronology from the tomb was interesting, to say the least. We got the three sort of typical early Neolithic dates you would expect to get from a tomb like this. These are all from short-lived, well, these two, one's hazelnut shell, two are hazelnut shell, sorry, and this one is a twig, an unidentified twig, but nevertheless relatively short-lived sample, so there's no old wood effect. And these ballpark span the period 4000 to 3600 BC. There isn't really enough stratigraphy and not enough early Neolithic dates to start playing around with a sort of a Bayesian analysis here. You'd probably lose more than you would gain in doing that. But it nevertheless shows us that there are, three good solid dates on top quality single entity samples that date the sort of 4000 to 3600 BC period. And then there is a little bit of a gap. We get then a single radiocarbon date of about 2100, 2200 BC, so sort of in the Chalcolithic onto the cusp of the early Bronze Age. And then we get a series of Bronze Age dates, which are for some from barley and some from hazelnut shells, a couple of Iron Age dates, and then, most surprisingly of all, and this maybe ties in nicely with the blue glass bead, a series of dates, all from hazelnut shells, from the charred hazelnut shells, I have to say, from the High Middle Ages, 13th, 14th centuries AD, which was quite a surprise. So I suppose the question we have to start asking ourselves is what does this all mean, and where do we put this in the context of other portal tomb studies? The only other portal tomb that's been substantially excavated is Poulnabrone in County Clare, and Poulnabrone. There have been other ones excavated, but in the modern era, with the full suite of scientific resources available, the only portal tomb to have been substantially excavated in recent decades has been Poulnabrone. County Clare was excavated in the 80s, and our own excavation. Poulnabrone agrees and has actually a much more extensive radiocarbon dating program than ours, and they also had survival of actual human remains. Our soil was quite acidic. We tested the soil acidity, and it certainly would have been impossible for bone remains to have remained for any significant period of time at Tirnony. But the radiocarbon dates from Poulnabrone are very similar to our radiocarbon dates. Their primary phase of use, like our own, is in the sort of from just after 4000 or maybe 3900. You've always got that sort of little bit of a wobble with radiocarbon right through to about 3600, and then some other little drips and drabs of activity after that. And sorry, one second. And so, sorry, trying to get something up here. Just wondering the sequence of my slides. Yeah, let's do. Don't know why it's doing this. It's animating the bits. Yeah. But Basically, I think what we have to look at with it's not going to animate more, is it? Why is this so slow? Right, yes. So anyway, right. So there does seem to be reasons for thinking that these tombs are more than just simply tombs. And I mentioned this at the very start, that there's been a sort of a debate as to whether the term dolmen is appropriate, whether they're social monuments, whether they're religious monuments, whether they're just purely for the disposal of the dead. And it certainly seems that they may have aspects of all three. It's been observed by quite a few people, Tatiana Kaitmano, who many, of course, may know, and Phyllis Mercer as well, that there is more than a little patterning to the distribution of portal tombs, portal dolmens, call them what you wish. They do tend to appear along river courses. It's been pointed out that they're not in particularly conspicuous locations. It seems that the builders of portal tombs did not go out of their way to seek out visibility. In fact, Phyllis Mercer has pointed out that some portal tombs, despite being very impressive, are located in such a way that it's almost impossible to see them, or to see them certainly from their best aspects. She had found one portal tomb where the frontage, the porta, if you like, the portal aspect was right up against the cliff face almost. You could barely make your way into it. So it was in somewhere where it was not only inconspicuous, it was almost hidden. So they're not craving visibility. Another interesting association that's been noticed by both Tatiana and Phyllis is that they tend to be located at the threshold of good land and poor agricultural land. And in fact, that was exactly how it was at Tirnony. The dolmen at Tirnony was right at the very edge of the good fields. You go another couple of 100 meters up the road and you were into very thin, rocky soil. But at Tirnony, you were still in a lovely sort of rich and threshold of sort of alluvial bit of an old river course, which was now you could now no longer see a paleo channel. Phyllis Mercer made the suggestion that as well as being burial monuments in places in which the dead were interred, that there was something else going on as well. And she built on some of the ideas of Maurice Bloch, and many of you may know Maurice Bloch. Maurice Bloch studied the Marina. He's a British Anglo-French anthropologist who studied the Marina, people living in Madagascar. And it's the bedrock, actually, for a lot of contemporary studies of megalithic tombs, because the Marina of Madagascar build something that's very, very analogous to a modern megalithic sort of structure. And they're these famous people that, they take the bodies out of the tomb and manipulate them and dress them and dance with them and have a bit of a party and then put them back in again. And he looked at what was the concepts behind the Marina and their activities. And he was of the opinion that as the bodies are taken out and dressed and treated, if you like, properly, they start to gradually disintegrate. And this is part of a process of the individual losing their individual identity and becoming part of a group of ancestors. And he notices that apart from very constrained times, like when they're taken out to be dressed and danced with, that they're not supposed to be mentioned and their names aren't supposed to be used apart from these very restricted times. So she built upon those ideas and also in the distribution of portal tombs and made the suggestion that portal tombs were being constructed at the end of the first period of deforestation and field creation in the early Neolithic period, and that the tombs were becoming the repository for de-individualized ancestors, if you like, who were becoming a shrine to the fertility of the land in the way that Maurice Bloch suggested. The Marina believed that the anonymous body of ancestors, once they'd properly passed over the other side through the disintegration of their individuality and the smashing of their bodies into little bits, would provide a sort of a favourable set of ancestors who would ensure the fecundity of the land and the families and the lineages of which they belong to. And she made this suggestion about portal tombs as well. And there's been some very interesting work. Many of you will have seen this paper, which Laura Cassidy, Ross Muldoon, Thomas Catter, Eileen, of course, Carlton Jones and others published last year, created a lot of attention in the media, because when talking about passage tombs, which of course is slightly later, I'm not really what we're talking about today, but when talking about passage tombs, they noted that there were evidence of very close consanguineous, incestuous relationships, effectively, in one passage tomb. And they also noticed that generally those people being buried in passage tombs were slightly more closely related, quite a lot more closely related, than the people who were being buried in court tombs or portal tombs. Interestingly, there's been, you probably know Neil Carlin and what do you call her? Oh, I forgot the name. Dublin Neolithic person, gone. Have actually written a sort of not quite a rebuttal, but have written an additional commentary on this, suggesting that while they agree that the passage tombs are quite closely related, they see other potential mechanisms for this as well. But this paper also, although it focused on the passage tombs, and that sort of grabbed the headlines, there were some other really interesting things in this paper. First thing it noted is that in Poulnabrone, which is not Tirnony, but it's an almost identical tomb with very identical artifacts. Yes, they had bones preserved. We didn't, but we almost certainly had bones from our phosphate analysis, and our chronologies very, very similar. So I think we can talk about the two together. That at Poulnabrone, that the nearby court tomb were part of the same broad genetic group. It's about 7 miles away, Poulnabrone, part of the same broad genetic group, but they weren't particularly closely related. They weren't the same family or extended family. It was sort of what you'd expect, like from, if you picked at random a group of people from two villages 6 or 7 miles apart, you know, there would be third and fourth and fifth cousins in there, but there were no close relatives being buried from one place to the other. And the other thing they found about Poulnabrone is that the people in Poulnabrone, while again representative of that wider genetic group from which both the Poulnabrone and the Poulnabrone people were drawn from, that the Poulnabrone internees, is that the right? That's not the right term. The persons who had been interred in Poulnabrone were themselves representative of a number of different lineages, and they were not particularly closely related cross-cutting wise. They were more separate lineages. And there's one other fascinating bit which is buried in the report, and it relates to the nitrogen isotopes work which was carried out on, well, all of the Neolithic tombs. And the really interesting thing is that the values for nitrogen isotopes for the Poulnabrone, these are the blue circles at the bottom here, are lower than they are for almost any, in fact, well, the 4 or 5 lowest values, not just for Ireland, but for any early Neolithic bodies that have been investigated in either Ireland or Britain, come from Poulnabrone. All these, the lowest values that have been found anywhere in Ireland or Britain for the nitrogen isotopes. And there are a few that are a little bit higher, but they come right at the very bottom of the range for every other tomb in Ireland or Britain. Out of the something like 290 odd skeletons from Britain and Ireland, where this sort of isotopic analysis has been carried out on early Neolithic human remains, I think Poulnabrone has the 5 lowest readings for nitrogen isotope. And the thing about nitrogen isotopes is that your level of nitrogen isotope really depends on your position within the food chain, if you like. And essentially, people or animals which are high up in the food chain, like tigers, will generally have a high level of nitrogen isotope, and ruminants and things like that, which are quite low in the food chain, will have a much lower level of nitrogen isotope. And the very fact that at Poulnabrone, almost all of the lowest 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, I haven't got the spreadsheet in front of me, values for nitrogen isotopes for the whole of these islands seems to come from this one particular site, which is the only portal tomb that has been subjected to this type of analysis. So the question, the big question is, if you had another portal tomb which had similarly well-preserved human remains as Poulnabrone, and you were to do the same sort of isotopic analysis, if we'd been lucky enough from Tirnony to have the same sort of preservation. And we had done that analysis. Would we have got equally low nitrogen isotope levels, which would indicate a diet that was very low in meat, if not indeed entirely vegetarian? And that's I mean, that is, again, that's a potentially very, very, very big thing, a very important result from this analysis of DNA and isotopes that Laura Cassidy and the rest have carried out. But I suppose Poulnabrone still sitting on its own. It's impossible to say whether this is just some site-specific effect or something else. But if it was matched by another site, another portal tomb, and we saw that there was the same low levels of nitrogen isotope, then we really would have to try and explain that. So I'm just actually going to skip back because I slide out a sequence earlier, and of course then this bloody thing animating its slides for me, which didn't want to do. Oh, something's gone wrong. Right, something happened there. Apologies, bear with me 1 second. I'm just picking a slide to show you. Yes. Right. I just want to show you this slide for a second or two before I discuss what could be going on with portal tombs and court tombs. And I know we've gone quite a while now. I think we were just about coming up to about an hour, so I'm not going to go on for too much longer. But this is a distribution map of portal tombs and court tombs. The portal tombs are in blue, I think, and the court tombs are in black. And although the patterning is a little bit patchy, and there are some areas where, you know, you do get clusters of portal tombs, like some parts of Longford, South Ulster and stuff like that. And, you know, there could be more detailed study, maybe to look at what, of the two together, to look at why some of these clusters exist and what are the different factors. But generally across the Irish landscape, we see a ratio of about one portal tomb to every 3 court tombs. I should say mostly the northern Irish landscape, northern with the small n, because both portal tombs and court tombs are largely phenomena of the northern half of the island. Yes, you do get some portal tombs down in Leinster. There's a small cluster of them down there, but the bulk of them, like court tombs, are concentrated in the northern half of the island. So I'm just going to skip forward again with my out of sequence slides. All right. So the idea that potentially we have portal tombs as the earliest tomb type, and portal tombs are also less numerous than court tombs, which are a little bit later, but which overlap with them in use. And the possibility that portal tombs might have people interred within them who have had some sort of restricted or special diet, perhaps low or even absent in animal products, might suggest that portal tombs have a function more than just simply the disposal of human remains. If you just wanted to dispose of human remains, there are plenty of court tombs, which are broadly contemporary, obviously, with portal tombs, and yet portal tombs continue to be used after the neighbouring court tombs, which are serving the same population, as we can see from the DNA of Poulnabrone and Parknabinia, when the court tombs come into use. So I mentioned earlier the idea that Phyllis Mercer had, that these in some respects might have been tombs or monuments which had a tomb function, amongst others, which were constructed at a very early stage in the Neolithic, something which our radiocarbon dates seem to have confirmed, after the first, if you like, deforestation and creation of the first trees. An idea which is quite compatible with that in many respects, and which may also then help explain the coexistence of court tombs and portal tombs together, is the idea of the Société à Maison, or house society, which is a concept that the anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss came up with decades ago. And in Claude Lévi-Strauss's conception of it, he was really talking more about chiefdoms. But where individual noble lineages might themselves split down into several different sublineages, but where they would find unity through a symbolic central house. And this is an example here of an Indonesian noble house. But subsequent anthropological work has sort of extended the concept a little bit beyond Levi-Strauss's initial quite narrow reading. And the first thing that seems to have been discovered by more recent anthropologists is the fact that it doesn't just have to occur in highly stratified chieftain-type societies. It can also occur in societies which are much more egalitarian, much more socially flat, which would fit an early Neolithic context. That's the first thing that's been found. And the second thing, which I think Levi-Strauss probably realized as well, but he liked a good title, and House Society was a good title. The symbolic center of the tribe, if you like, the thing that draws the lineages together, does not actually have to be a house. And there are examples and Hawaiian boats and stuff like that, and all sorts of things being used. And of course, tomb is something which can be used as well. A tomb, in fact, after a house is probably the perfect thing to use as a symbolic center. So in a model which might be starting to emerge, and we need a little bit more information to do this, but we can think of portal tombs as being an early stage in monumentality in the Irish Neolithic, where as well as being a repository for human remains, they also served some sort of a function, if you like, in the marina of Madagascar way, of a shrine which was intended to get the favor, if you like, of the ancestral groups. But as time moved on, and as individual lineages began to differentiate, and you start to then get a slightly different type of non-shrine, maybe more burial type monument, such as the court tomb. And of course, there's been discussion of how things like double court tombs and stuff like that might well represent, where one lineage after a period of time splits in two. So rather than both use the same tomb, they build another tomb back to back and stuff like that. That as you begin to see an increasingly complexity and a dispersal and divergence of different lineages of Neolithic tribal communities, that the portal tomb actually starts to become important in a different way, and not necessarily important as a way of placating the ancestors, but maybe becomes important in a way of bringing unity to a group of people who are increasingly diverse in terms of the lineages and sublineages that they have. So to try and draw it all together into one final sort of a summary slide, we now know, we kind of suspected, obviously, from the Poulnabrone results, which were very good, but we have confirmed the Poulnabrone results that portal tombs are built in the period immediately after 4000 BC. Construction certainly starts by 3800 BC and probably a little earlier than that. We do have evidence for a sequence of activity at Tirnony, several pauses. It's a dynamic monument. It isn't just a single phase monument. It emerges over a period of time. How long that period of time is, unfortunately, our chronology is not refined enough to say, and it's even if we've got better stratification and more layers, I don't even think in radiocarbon terms that we could probably have separated. It's probably within a few years, at most maybe a few decades. We know that the tomb was constructed in a pit that was capped by a stone layer, and we know then that the tomb was constructed in that, again, possibly with a certain amount of phasing in the actual construction of the tomb. We have that layer that separates the chamber, the rear chamber stones from the front portal stones. There is a patterning in the distribution of the artifacts, which is really interesting. And I said I would return briefly to this, but the positioning of the broken pottery and the bringing of the broken pottery into the tomb, the places where the broken pottery is most common in the tomb are the places where we get the highest phosphate readings. And that suggests that broken pot sherds, broken pots already fragmented, portions of broken pots are being brought into the tomb and placed with the deceased human. And there is a cross-cultural phenomenon of associating pots with people in various different ways. I mean, even the terminology that we use, not just in English, but in multiple languages, personifies pots. We talk about the mouth of the pot, the belly of the pot. We talk about humans as crocks. In the Bible, we talk about people as vessels. And this is something which is replicated in multiple cultures around the world, is this sort of association between the human person and the fragility of the human person, and the pot, the vessel, and the fragility of the pot. And it's probably being contrasted with the durability and the permanence of the stone of the tomb. And then it's quite possible that the positioning of the flint artifacts, which seems to contrast with the positioning of the ceramic artifacts, reflects that sort of binary opposition, to sort of get a bit Levi-Straussian again, that binary opposition in the concepts of the human pot and permanence, human pot and impermanence, and tomb and flint and permanence. We can say again that from the dating of Tirnony and Poulnabrone that portal tombs predate court tombs, but we also can see that they remain in use parallel with court tombs. Court tombs seem to start between about 37 and 3800. That Rick Schulting and Eileen project from a few years ago and a few others established that. And I think we together have established that portal tombs predate them by a century or two, but they then remain in parallel use probably up until at least 36, maybe even 3500 BC in their primary phase of use. And we also know from the DNA work that's been carried out by Laura Casti and the rest of them that portal tombs and court tombs probably serve the same local societies. And that's quite interesting. But the portal tomb itself seems to have a greater diversity, potentially anyway, a greater diversity of lineages, albeit from the same general local society. And those along that fact, along with a smaller number of portal tombs relative to court tombs, and possibly dietary distinctions in the people that are in the portal tombs as to those that are in the court tombs, if the Poulnabrone results are ever replicated anywhere else, that suggests additional purpose to portal tombs as well as just simply being tombs. And we're flying a kite, which might be right or it might be wrong, probably wrong, is that these are possibly symbolic tribal centres unifying multiple separate lineages, which each of those separate lineages themselves are monumentalized individually as court tombs, but the portal tomb provides the overarching umbrella group, if you like, for the lineages together and the tribe. So any questions to tease out that, or any suggestions for that matter? I'll be delighted to hear them. Yes, sorry, I probably should have made that a bit clear. The likelihood is they were covered in a cairn. There's debate about this, but at Tirnony, for instance, we have a very good historical record from the first edition Ordnance Survey, where the removal of the stones from the cairn to make the road, presumably the road that's on the first edition Ordnance Survey map, is described. Also, there have been excavations more in Britain than in Ireland of portal dolmens or portal tombs. So they describe them more so as dolmens than we do. The terminology is a bit interchangeable, where there have been traces of cairn material found. Now, a couple of archaeologists who I mentioned earlier, Vicky Cummings and Colin Richards, have critiqued that very interestingly, and they've said that on the ones where the cairn material has been found, it hasn't been encompassing the whole of the tomb. And they have suggested that rather than being a cairn, it's some sort of stone platform, if you like, for people to walk around the tomb. And I suppose it's very hard to prove or disprove that one way or the other. And it really comes down to your conception as to how you think the tomb's been constructed. If you believe that the tomb is constructed by, as Cummings and Richards suggest, raising a stone from in situ, if you like, from quarrying it from the virgin rock and then raising it upwards and then putting in stones underneath, and what they describe as sort of they describe it as a almost magical transformative kind of act. if you accept that sort of interpretation for constructing a tomb, then you don't need a cairn. But for every other type of tomb construction that we can conceive of, unless you want to get some sort of fancy pulley blocks and very big trees, then you do need some sort of a cairn. And we do have evidence for cairns, both documentary evidence and excavated evidence. But there is this alternative position which has merit. But you can't, it's hard to establish one way or the other for portal tombs that their cairns may have been small or residual or platforms, and that there was another method used to put the capstone in place, essentially, than dragging on the cairn. So, but yes, I think the likelihood is that there was a substantial cairn from the documentary record, a substantial cairn at Tirnony. Yeah.
I think it seems like the things were. How many people would have taken to construct those things, and what sort of population size would there have been about that time?
Population, there's been some really interesting work. I think you've had Rowan McLaughlin has spoken here to the Society on a couple of occasions about his population work, and Rowan has done some fascinating population work on the early Irish Neolithic. And one of the things about Neolithic communities, this is not a short answer, and of course the end is going to be I don't know, right? So we'll just tell you that. But some of Rowan's work on Neolithic population. Well, for a start, when you move, say, from being a hunter-gatherer to being a farmer, or if you have a new group of farmers come in, the first thing that happens with a farming community is it's sedentary. And when you become sedentary, your possibility for population increase really rockets. For a start, when women are feeding their own children for extended periods of time, as they tend to do in mobile hunter-gatherer communities for longer than in sedentary communities, there's a natural, for want of a better word, contraceptive in feeding your own children, which lowers fertility, and probably quite a good idea for a hunter-gatherer community, because you want fertility to be quite close to just replacement levels, because your population is tied to the carrying capacity of the land. But whenever you start to farm, two things happen. One, you can generate as much food as you like, more or less, although you're famine prone a bit because you have much narrower range of foodstuffs. But also because you're sedentary, you don't have that sort of limiting sort of contraceptive effect of women of childbearing age feeding their own children. So almost every early Neolithic society shows a really, really rapid rise in population. Rowan McLaughlin has estimated that by sometime around about 3700 BC, so we're talking, just maybe 100 years, maybe 200 years at most, after the construction of some of the portal tombs, that the population of the island of Ireland probably hits about 2 million people. And he has done that, he's done it really by taking the numbers of radiocarbon dates which have been found. There's now about 10 or 12,000 radiocarbon dates been found in excavations in the island of Ireland, and he has mapped them, and he has then mapped the changes in frequency. And where we do have good proxies, other proxies for population, apart from the radiocarbon dating, he has tied them into the frequency of radiocarbon dates, and then used that to estimate population for periods where we don't have those proxies, like say documentary records, for instance, or environmental records. And he has taken that, and he notices that that sort of big peak in population of at about 3,700 ties in very well with the decrease in tree cover. For instance, trees get really whacked in the early Neolithic period, the increase in grass cover, cereal pollen, all that sort of stuff. So I think with broad brush strokes anyway, I think Rowan's ideas work, at least for the Neolithic, certainly, So at the very start of the Neolithic, we're not talking 2 million people. And I suppose if it probably, I haven't got my slide rule here, but you could probably work back from I say a population of 2 million around 3700 BC and work out for the rate of growth in the other direction what you would have had of a population around 3900 BC. But I still think that even if it's much smaller, each individual community will have to have hundreds of people in it, and probably will therefore have at least dozens of people who at certain times of the agricultural season are free to come and construct these large tombs.
It would have taken quite a lot of individuals, and it would have been like a community effort for that local area. It would be like building a church type thing, but might be more functional when a church may be like a community center type place. It has a lot of functions. It's about bringing people together. To construct it, they would have had to come together in the first place, and there had to be cooperation, and it would probably been a place of gathering.
I think you're spot on. Yeah, I think and it's not just. I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's not just one thing, and it's trying to tease out the different things that it would have meant to people. I suppose part of the fun of the game, you know. And
bigger things like new graves, the big passage tombs, and the big. To me, would they have been more? Well, they came a bit later, didn't they?
They're a good wee bit later. I mean, yeah, passage tombs are certainly being constructed probably from about 3600, but they're quite small ones. But they call the developed passage tomb. They're probably coming along more like 32, 3300 BC. And that is a good bit later. And you've passed through that period of big population. And you've gone, according to Rowan, you've gone over the hump and dumped down, turned down a wee bit. But yeah, you're talking about a much more
sophistication.
Yeah.
Construction, alignments with the stars or the sun and the moon, whatever. So to me, there's also, they can afford people who have knowledge, who've got the time to develop knowledge of the time of year when the sun's going to rise in a certain place, that sort of thing. The pilgrimage for people from much bigger areas to come to like a central.
Well, I think absolutely, and the other thing as well as those things you say, which is technical competence in multiple areas, you've also probably got. I know there's again the paper that's been published recently, Neil Carlin and the others, sort of takes a slightly different tack, but certainly some people suggest that the passage tombs are a much more structured society in terms of much more hierarchy. So the likelihood is from the people who are building and using the portal tombs and the court tombs are relatively flat. Now that doesn't mean that they're totally egalitarian, but they're a relatively flat society in which there will be, say, inverted commas, chiefs, but like where, say, chiefdom in inverted commas is obtained through your own personal achievements. So you're a great hunter or a great warrior or a great craftsperson. Whereas quite possibly by the time we're getting to the passage tombs, your inverted commas chief position is not based on your abilities. It's maybe based on your great grandfather's abilities, who effectively managed to set up some sort of, I suppose, essentially aristocratic lineage. And one of the things about these Neolithic communities, of course, is that they're famine prone, and because you go from being dependent on 200 different types of fruits and nuts and berries and fish and roots and things like that, to all of a sudden being dependent on 2 or 3 crops and a few animals, and your population meanwhile is 20 times bigger than it was as well. So they're famine prone. So I suppose a bit like, and again, biblical analogy, like Pharaoh opening the grain at times of famine. If you're the person that's managing to stockpile grain and there's a famine, and you say, yeah, you can get grain, but from now on, you're mine, then you can establish yourself, I suppose, in a Neolithic society as some sort of aristocrat potentially over a period of time.
So the big tombs, you were saying there was more inbredness, whatever, inbreed. So possibly it's a little bit like Egypt, with the pharaohs.
Well, that's exactly the point the point that was made by the Laura Cassidy and Ross Muldoon in the rest's article. They drew a direct analogy with Egypt and said that, in their opinion, that one possibility was that as a way of differentiating an elite group or an elite royal family in the manner of Pharaoh's family, that they picked marriage partners would not be acceptable to the rest of the society, essentially, to keep the bloodline pure and to keep the what you would call it, the power and the wealth within their narrow circle. Now it has to be said, I think that's one explanation. I think most archaeologists accept that there are other explanations, and I think Laura Cassidy and the rest do too. And of course, there's just simply the possibility of, abuse or something like that. You can't rule any of those things out. But I think everybody has been struck at just how, the medieval stories of, the the Hill of Shame or whatever it was called. I'm not sure what the Irish term is for Newgrange, you know, and the legends that are associated with it. It just seems so similar to what was found in the by the DNA analysis. But nevertheless, you know, there are lots of other archaeological and anthropological explanations. But yeah, absolutely, definite possibility what you're saying.
Right, I think maybe we should say we sort of gone straight into the questions without even saying thank you to Dr. Cormac.
Oh no, I'm happy with the questions all night. Yeah.
For his very, very interesting lecture indeed. So would anybody else like to ask any questions before we vote of thanks? Yes, please.
Is there any correlation between the structure of these portal tombs and the erratics that were already in the landscape?
Well, yeah, that is a good question. Certainly that has been, I mean, there has been work carried out again by in places like the Burren, and not the Burren in County Clare, but you know, the Fermanagh Leitrim, Cavan Burren, that's the one, yeah, where you know, there have been attempts to look and see if certain stones might be the sort of quarry places for portal tombs, or the capstones for portal tombs. And there have been a few possibles that have been pointed out, yes. And the other thing, of course, is that early Neolithic, it's not quite post-glacial, the glacials are gone a long time. But one of the things about the first landscapes, if you like, after the glaciers go, is that there are a lot more erratics. We've got rid of so many of our erratics through, you know, millennia of farming. And that's one of the interesting things about the Cummings and Richards theory, because what they're suggesting is, which is that these are, you know, levered up, and is exactly the technique that you use to get rid of glacial erratics in your land, you know. So, and even, well, not now because you got a digger, but if you've got one, but you know, even up until the end of the 19th century, if you had a large rock and you wanted to get rid of it, the way you did that was you dug under it, you put in some large planks or logs, you levered it up, and then you propped it up with something else, and you went round the other side and did the same. So that's essentially the technique that Cummings and Richards are talking about, as they call raising the capstone. Where their argument, and I'm not saying they're not right in some cases, but they're not right in every case for a couple of reasons. I think one is not every portal tomb has a quarry site like that associated with it, where it could be raised directly. At Tirnony, we didn't. But you know, just up the road, there was a really good, and it's not a glacial erratic, but there was really good exposed, what you call it, really good exposed rock, you know, so it's just perfect for the construction of a portal tomb stone, or portal tomb capstone, if that's what you wanted to do with it, you know. And we looked, but we couldn't see anywhere where it was quarried from. But I mean, it's been quarried so many times since, you know. But yeah, I mean, it's nobody has managed to establish that with certainty, but it's a definite question. And part of the problem is that so many erratics have been cleared away in the intervening millennia. So you need to ideally go back a few thousand years and examine it. But yes, a very good question. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Were any of the capstones found to come from far away, the same as the stone?
Well, the Stonehenge's interesting. It's not everybody believes it comes from Orkney or the north of Scotland. You know, there's apparently a couple of other places. I'm not a geologist, and I haven't read into it to make a definitive statement. But I think a lot of archaeologists consider that it could have come from up there, but it could have come from other places as well. But in the case of portal tombs, no, there's no evidence for any of the stone that's been examined, and any of them not coming from the immediate regional area. There's actually one further thing I actually should have said, and I was going to mention it when I had the 3D model. I might be able to show you it in the 3D model. The 3D model actually looks a wee bit more grainy on screen than I'd hoped. Where is it? But there is some. Oh, I can't find it now. There is a couple of what might be cut marks on it. Wonder, can you see them? I don't know if you'll be able to see this. This looks quite good on my screen here. But there appear to be, do you see? you see there? Little cut mark? Oh, all right. Sorry, I don't even know. F5 maybe? No, no, sorry. Sorry. Was that, oh, yeah.
But the thing about portal pits is they're local. It's about a local community, so they're not.
Yeah.
It's not a big showpiece.
Yes, exactly.
So everything's going to come from.
Can you see that little depression there? And a series of little depressions there. And one there. They're not very clear in that. In fact, they're not even terribly clear on the actual stone itself, but some people have suggested that they're cut marks.
What type of stone is it?
It's sandstone.
Okay, any last questions?
Aaron on YouTube. Could the burning area under the portal stone have been to harden the ground to support the stone better?
Sorry, could the areas with
The burning that was under the portal?
Well, I mean, it's on one level that's correct. If you have an earth like that and you burn it, yes, it will be a little bit harder. But the weight of those portal stones is so great that, I mean, if you think about it, if you were to think of it as if you were to take, say, good clay and fire it, it forms a very hard ceramic. But if you set, you know, a 1.5 ton or 2 ton or 3 ton portal stone on it, it will crush. So I don't think that that's likely to have been the function of that burning. It's one of these tantalizing things, you know. We didn't lift enough of the stones. We only lifted just that little corner with the broken portal stone and the front west side stone were the only bits that were lifted, and we didn't see obviously onto the other stones to see if they similarly had fire reddening. But as I say, it feels like a satisfying idea to think of someone. You can just imagine, you know, it's the Hammer horror sort of thing. You know, the smoke goes up, you see the little plume of flames, and then the stone is lowered down while all the priests look on and chant. You know, someone sacrificed. You know, you can imagine. Maybe not the last bit.
On Zoom, we have one question that asks, could the pottery sherds that were found centrally in the tomb have been considered as rubbish, whereas the valuable flint artifacts that were against the sides of the internal space were overlooked in what must have been a very darkly lit room?
Well, I think you have to remember that if the pots were rubbish, why would they have been brought in the first place? And the second thing is we didn't find any we found 1 or 2 pieces of Neolithic pottery at the doorway, but we didn't find any outside the tomb at all, either in the topsoil. I mean, if they'd been disturbed, we would have found them in the topsoil. These things are still pretty durable, even though I mentioned earlier they get crushed very easily. They last for thousands of years, even in topsoil. So the fact that we only found them in the tomb means they have to have been brought in there, I think, for a purpose. So I don't think that they were simply thought of as rubbish. The other thing is that this is a pattern of behaviour. When we excavate Neolithic settlement sites, we fairly frequently find, maybe not intact, but fairly complete Neolithic pottery vessels are found reasonably frequently. And I was actually looking at a pottery assemblage there quite recently of pots from a settlement site, and you know, I wasn't gluing them together, but you didn't need to play with them for very long until you found out you complete profiles and you could have built most of the bowl out of them. And no part of the Tirnony assemblage had been more than maybe 10 or 15%, and that's the same for all of these early Neolithic tombs. If it was just rubbish, then on some occasions we'd be finding more, in some occasions we'd be finding less. We'd be finding some outside, but we're consistently just finding them inside or at the mouth of the tomb. We're not finding them outside, and we're never finding more than a small fragment of each vessel. So I don't think we can interpret it as rubbish.
The other question is, could climate aggression at that time cause a decline in the quantity and quality of the grasslands, and then since cattle and meat would become scarcer, could that be why people were turning to a more vegetarian diet and this is showing up in the?
Well, I think the first thing we have to, and I mean, it's I didn't go into this in too much detail, but perhaps if I'd maybe shown the spreadsheet for Poulnabrone and Poulnabrone, which Laura Cassidy and her colleagues have produced. And when you look at the isotope levels for the nitrogen isotope, for the Poulnabrone ones, they are the lowest, but they're also, they were radiocarbon dated as well. And those lowest values, some of them are very early dates from Poulnabrone, but some of them are contemporary with much higher nitrogen isotope levels from Poulnabrone and other quartz tombs. So this isn't just a chronological phenomenon, it's a phenomenon of portal tombs. Other contemporary tombs, like quartz tombs, which are the nitrogen isotope levels are higher. So I don't think you can just explain it on chronological terms alone.
Those are all the questions.
Sorry, on the area of plant, you said there was no charcoal, so
No.
what kind of, would it have been fabric perhaps, or grasses, or
well,
do you really know what was going on?
I wonder, I've spent a lot of time wondering that, because the first thing you do whenever you get something that looks a bit burnt as an archaeologist, you go, right, well, let's just take that, float it, and hopefully you see all the charcoal and little bits of seeds and burnt hazelnut shells and all the rest come to the surface, and you scrape that away and you pick out your radiocarbon samples and bingo. There was absolutely no carbonized matter in the soil sample that was taken from that fire-reddened earth. So I think then you have to be into the sort of things that you suggest, which is burnt grass. That was the thing that occurred to me. What kindling, basically, stuff that would burn so hot and so quickly that any carbonized matter would just blow away. And I think that's, so it was almost like a fire was set with a small amount of fire. And maybe if all you want to do is just, maybe if it is some sort of ritual just for cleansing, maybe that's enough, you just have a quick woof and it's away, and there's nothing left, unfortunately, to date. I presume that's the reason, but I mean,
Or maybe they kept the remains of it and used it for a ritual afterwards.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could do that, but I mean, even then, if that was the case, we were unlucky. There weren't even a couple of wee bits, that got trodden down into it. But yeah, it is quite possible they were taken script. Yeah, yeah.
It's a well-used portal tomb, isn't it? You said it's been used from Neolithic, early Neolithic to Bronze Age. So the stratification might be messed about with.
Well, not only that, there's the stratification has been interrupted. I mean, we saw that blue glass bead that was pressed down into it. There were Bronze Age dates from some of the samples from even the lower layer. So there has been a certain amount of, there's disturbance, and then there's what they call bioturbation, which is just simply the action of roots and worms and things like that. That said, the two layers were distinct. They were still quite distinct. So it hadn't been complete. But yes, there was a lot of disturbance. And part of the reason why I said there's not much point in doing what we sometimes do, which is a thing called Bayesian analysis, where you create a model of the deep phases of deposition of the strata, and then you have your radiocarbon dates, and you use the model to mathematically constrain the ranges of the radiocarbon dates. And it sometimes works incredibly well, but for it to work, you have to be very certain of the sequence in which things have happened, and any churning, any root action, any disturbance introduces, well, not just doubt, but it actually introduces material in the wrong position and effectively undermines your attempts to carry out that kind of analysis. So that's why we just presented the radiocarbon dates simply as a spread of a spread of dates. So you can see there's some activity here, there's some activity here, and there's some activity there. We didn't try and go beyond that. But yes, that's the.
In those societies, you're talking about the spread of the flints that were around the edges, and there were shards of pottery. Would the men have been doing the knotting? Would they have been invaluable? Because they were valuable things in those days, weren't they?
Yeah,
Those things.
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe they're associated with the person that napped it, the person who used it. Again, with the pottery, whoever made the pottery or whoever used it to cook with.
I mean,
remember people put a piece of pottery in there that was associated with that person, or
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely very possible. Although, I mean, yes, there is in the deposition of grave goods, especially things like where you've got burials of individuals. Yes, there is a tendency to put in goods which are appropriate to the individual being buried, and that can happen in different ways. It could be a little personal artifact, an object, someone's knife or something like that they always used, or some when you think of it nowadays, people pack of cigarettes in someone's top pocket, or something like that. Or it can be things that are appropriate to maybe the status of the person, their social position, or their role in life, or their roles in life. And so there are a number of different considerations which tend to be followed whenever humans put grave goods for other people into graves. And it's strange. I mean, again, cross-culturally, all different societies kind of play around in different ways with the same set of concepts. Just the things you said, yeah. Something that's personal to an individual, absolutely, yes. And yet there are other ways of looking at it too. And sometimes there are things that you might maybe describe as personal rituals, and maybe things you describe as more social structural rituals, and the two of them can exist in parallel, happily beside each other. Yeah.
Okay, everybody, I think before we lose any more people to go and get their trains or whatever, sorry about that.
No, not at all. No, I know. I sometimes go on a wee bit too long.
Thank you very, very much indeed for what to say. You've given a very good think about, and there's so much more that they say in the future. I think that once another
we really need another portal. We've got a good sample now. We need a third. I mean, if we had a third one, I mean, just even that question of isotopes, which we couldn't answer because we have no bones. But if we found another portal tomb which had bones, and we managed to, I think that's one of the biggest things to come out of the Cassidy paper. Although obviously the headlines have been focused on the passage tomb aspect of it.
Okay, so just a big thank you to Cormac and the small token of
For God's sake, no. My library extended. Thank you.
Right, just before that, the rest of you go, just a few announcements. So that's the last lecture before the summer break. But of course, UAS will go away during the summer, so we've got a number of events coming up. On the 16th of June, an evening visit to the Ards Peninsula, Millen Bay and other sites, meeting at 6:15 at Tirnony. The 5th of July, a visit to Brave Museum in Ballymena and some local sites there. In late July, there's a Festival of Archaeology to be kicking off up at Divas, a number of events going on, including an event down at Castle Ward on the 7th of July. In late August, we'll have a visit to Benburb Priory, Castle and the Church of Ireland there, and other local sites. So I suggest you just keep an eye on our socials and on the website, and your emails give you information about the due course, and you can contact the secretary about those. And our lectures will return, of course, in September. For a good summer in the meantime, and with these events.